Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to work with external data in WordPress and how to have dynamic URLs based on that external data. Let me explain exactly what we're going to do. So for example, I have a github.com account, right? And this endpoint gives us raw JSON. You could use this same URL, just swap in your username on GitHub, but this gives me raw data of all my different repos. And here I have an example WordPress homepage, and it's showing me a list of all of my github.com repos, and it's pulling directly from this URL. Then when I click on one, like if I click on Brad's boilerplate WordPress, check out the address bar. So this is still on my WordPress website, but it added on, /repo/ and then that one, and that's fetching the JSON for that specific item. Now, what's really cool here is I don't have any posts in my WordPress database. Like you can click on posts. I don't have any custom post types. I'm fetching this data externally, but then it's not like we're fetching at each request. We're using really intelligent caching. So for example, like the first time, let me visit a new one. Like the first time I visit declarative toggle, notice it takes like maybe half a second or 2/3 of a second, but now when I refresh, it's instant. Or like, let's see it again. Like if I go to Express Pets, it takes like, I would say half a second, and now it's instant. So we're also going to learn how to cache that in the database using the WordPress Transients and Options APIs. This creates a really robust, resilient setup so that even if like these endpoints became offline or not available, your website won't crash. It will just show the previous, like the last successfully fetched data. Well, we're using transients, so you can say, hey, fetch fresh data every 20 minutes, every hour, every 3 hours, right? So then every visitor will just be served up that lightning fast cached version. But then even once it's considered old or expired and we need to go get fresh data, if that network request fails for any reason, we've got a backup. So in my opinion, this is the best of all worlds, and it's also fun to learn how to set up dynamic URLs in WordPress that aren't tied to posts in your database. Cool. So I'll share my boilerplate get cached external JSON function with you, but we're going to dig into like my example front page and repo template. So we're going to learn how to set a template for a custom URL, right? Like this single URL view, this doesn't map to a default WordPress template, but we can get creative in functions.php and tell it to use this exact template file for those single URLs. I'm excited to set this up with you in this video, but first, a quick word from today's sponsor. Well, I shouldn't say sponsor. I was not paid to make this video, but I do want to thank EpoMaker for sending me their new TH99 keyboard for the purpose of reviewing it. So I've been using it for the last week, and my overall assessment is that this is a satisfying keyboard to use. Now, sales pages always have a lot of information about a product, but in particular, I wanted to highlight this description of the keyboard. So it's equipped with 5 layers of soft materials to reduce hollow noise and mellow the switch sound to be gentle and thocky. The plate mount stabilizers and linear switches are lubed and tuned to be smooth and tactile, while the addition of the sound enhancement pad highlights the creamy switch sound for enjoyable ASMR. I think that's a very accurate description of this keyboard. I would just add that it is loud. So yes, it's thocky, yes, it's smooth, yes, it is not at all hollow, but boy, is it loud. Sometimes that's what I want. I enjoy the loudness, but other times I will admit, I wish I could use this keyboard without making quite this much noise, but it's glorious noise. I like that it has a wired mode, a Bluetooth mode, and a USB wireless receiver mode, and I really like that when you're not using that USB receiver, there's a perfect place to keep it in the keyboard itself so that you don't have to keep it in a random drawer or backpack or end up losing it when you're not using it. Check out the link in the description to learn more about the TH99. Thanks again to EpoMaker for this collaboration. Now let's get on with the action. Okay, so behind the scenes, I just removed all of that dynamic behavior from my website, so now you and I can build it together. So you should be able to follow along now with any local WordPress website and any classic theme. I've removed all of the custom code, so now you and I can start fresh together. So where do we begin? Well, I have this front page.php. Currently, it just says, heading level 2, my GitHub repos, and then our content will go here. That's what we're seeing right about here. So from this point forward, how can we start to fetch this data? And you can swap it. If you have a github.com account, you can swap in your username here. But like, how can we fetch this and display the list of repos on our homepage? Well, I want my videos to be about educational value and not just memorizing or staring at syntax for half an hour. So I actually have this GitHub gist that I want to share with you. You'll find a link to this in the description of this video or maybe the pinned comment But from this URL, I've shared with you my boilerplate function called get cached external JSON. We can walk through the code line by line of what it's doing, but let's first just go paste it into our functions.php file. And just to be clear, this snippet of code actually has multiple functions. So if you scroll down, that function that we're interested in, get cached JSON, ends around line number 52. And then down here, we also have some other functions that we'll use later in the video. But for now, you would just select from what? Line number 1 down to about line 52, or I guess just line 50. So copy that. And then in your classic theme, just go into functions.php. Down at the very bottom, I'm just going to paste it in. And now you should never just use code without understanding what it's doing. So let's just take a quick bird's eye view of what's going on. So we have this function. You give it one argument, the URL that you want to fetch data from. These two lines are just going to create a variable name, right? Like with a unique ID or unique value that we can use in the database. So those are just sort of like labels or variable names. This line, this is going to check to see, like, does that already exist in the database? Like, based on the incoming URL that you're trying to fetch data from, have we already cached this? Or has this already been stored in a transient? So then this line of code, as long as that isn't false, or I guess you could just say if it's true, right? Like if it's not empty, just return, like stop the execution of this function, just return that cached data. If we don't have any cached data, then we need to keep moving down. So we're using the WordPress remote get to go fetch a bit of data. If there's an error, what do we want to do? Well, first we're going to check to see, is there backup data? So first of all, before we go any further, let's make a clear distinction between what is a transient and what is an option. So a transient is a special piece of data in WordPress that is only going to live for X amount of time, like maybe a minute or an hour or a day. But after a certain amount of time, it's going to expire and get deleted. So what we're doing here is we're saying if there was an error with this response, right, and so there's no transient available, we don't just want to throw an error message. We want to show the last, like the previous successfully downloaded data. Cool, let's keep going. This is just a bit of boilerplate to actually get the JSON data ready. Now it lives in a variable called data. And then we're essentially checking for an error again. Like if that is empty, that means there was some sort of problem, or maybe the endpoint was down, or the endpoint was having a bug in the code, any sort of problem. Then just return the permanently saved option that was in an option, not in a transient. Don't worry, a bit later in this video, we'll look at our database, and so you can see the difference between a transient and an option. They all just live in the same database table, so we'll cover that. The idea here, though, is that a transient is temporary and an option is permanent. Okay, let's keep it moving. If this is not true, that means like things are looking good. If things are looking good, we want to go fetch fresh data because maybe the transient has expired. Maybe that's the reason it doesn't already exist. So go get the data, and here's where you can say how long you want it to be considered fresh for. So this would be for 8 hours. It's measured in seconds. If you just wanted a minute, right, you could swap this out and just put in 60. You get the idea. So that's setting the transient, but then when we fetch that good, new, awesome, up-to-date data, we also want to keep a permanent version of it. So that way, even if the transient expires, but there's a bug somewhere on the external data, our website doesn't crash. We at least have that permanent copy that we can show. So that's what's going on here. And then ultimately, we're just returning data. Now, you didn't need to go through that line by line. I just think it's good that when you're borrowing or copy and pasting code that you have a general idea of what it's doing. But now we can save this file, and now you can forget about everything we just went through. All that matters, the only thing that matters is that now we have this really easy to use function called get cached external JSON. Let's go start using this function, and then we can even look at our database to see what it's doing. So do this with me. I'm going to go into my frontpage.php template, and instead of, our content will go here, I'm going to get rid of that, and I'll go into PHP, and then I'll get rid of this opening PHP for the footer. Cool. So now we're just in PHP, and the very first thing I would do is just say $data equals, and then I'm going to use that function, that handy function. So it's get cached external JSON, semicolon, and now in these parentheses you would have quotes, and now your URL would be different than mine if you have a github.com account that you want to experiment with. But you can just pause the video and type in this URL, but maybe you use your username instead of mine. Okay, and then in these quotes you would just paste it in, and now we have this really convenient variable named data, and now it's as simple as just looping through it. So I'd probably just say like if parentheses curly brackets, after that say else curly brackets. If for the condition, it would just be like if $data as long as it exists. Else, that would be sort of like the fallback message. So maybe we can echo, just like a paragraph that says, let me add a semicolon at the end there. Let's just say, unable to load information about repos. But if we have data, what do we want to do? Well, let's start with an unordered list. So I would just output, opening tag, semicolon. Below that, let's echo the closing tag. Oops, quotes, closing tag. In the middle, though, this is where we can loop through. So I would use a for each, parentheses, curly brackets. In the parentheses, there would be $data as, and then make up a single name. So I would just call it like $repo, or you could call it, $item. Now, in the body of the curly brackets here, I want to output HTML, so it's just personal preference. You could get creative with echo, but I like to drop out of PHP at the end of this line. So question mark greater than, and then just right before this closing curly bracket, go back into PHP. Then on this line, we're free to type out HTML. So I would just have like an LI, and then like an A element, hit tab. We'll type in the URL in just a moment, but the actual text that you click on, right, you'd say like, click me. Now, if I save that and refresh my home page, cool. We see as many click me's as I have repos. So if you only have 3 repos, you would see 3 click me's. Let's go back and actually use the real data from that JSON response though. So instead of click me, I would just go into PHP and I would echo, and I'm going to use escape HTML just to stay safe and secure. In other words, if there was some sort of malicious HTML or JavaScript in the values coming from GitHub, this would keep us safe. But then it would just be $repo, square brackets to look inside the array for quotes, name. So you can save that and refresh. Now you're seeing the actual name values. Cool. Now the URL, this is where it's completely up to you. We have complete freedom to do anything we want. But for the href value, I think I'm going to say like /repo / and then, just like a dynamic, like whatever the name for this specific repo is. So to save a bunch of typing, I would just borrow this PHP block and copy and paste it. So take this, and that would just be your URL scheme. So like if I save that and refresh, now when I hover over this one, notice at the bottom, it's going to take you to, I can click on it, for example, /repo / bootcamp pet data. Cool. So this is where things get truly fun. Now we're going to learn how to set up this dynamic URL structure. So this is not based on a custom post type. This is like us completely taking matters into our own hands. How can we be on the lookout for this URL pattern? Well, this is another example where I don't think there's much educational value in typing things out character by character. So on that same link that took you to my GitHub gist, here's the function that we set up just a moment ago. If you scroll down around line number 54, you're going to see a function named custom repo rewrite rule. And I will be perfectly honest with you, I am not very talented when it comes to regular expressions. So this is the exact type of code that I would ask ChatGPT or whatever your AI coding assistant tool of preference is. But I essentially got this code by saying, hey, ChatGPT, I'm using WordPress and I want to write a rewrite rule. And I just tell it exactly what I'm trying to accomplish, right? So I have a URL pattern of /repo / name. And like, how can I get WordPress to understand that structure so that it's very easy for us to access just this final segment of the URL? Well, the answer is you just add a rewrite rule. So this is a regular expression, and then it's just adding a URL parameter of custom repo equals, whatever that name was. And then this little bit of code, this goes hand in hand with the rewrite. This just makes sure that that query variable in the URL is actually available to us. And then the final missing piece of the puzzle is this function. What this does is like, okay, so now imagine we've set things up so that when you visit a URL like this, WordPress is successfully like noticing this pattern and successfully like extracting just this little part of the segment. But then the job's not done. Like imagine we've extracted bootcamp pet data. Like what do we actually want to do? What we want to do is show a completely custom template, right? It's not like we want to show page.php or single.php. So this little bit of code is just saying, if you detect that incoming query variable, that URL pattern, like if this is available, do this instead. Like we're just taking matters into our own hands and loading a completely custom template that has nothing to do with the default nature of like post types and single and page. Cool. So right now we need to move over these functions. So you've already copied over like from line 0 to line 50. Now we just move over these 3 functions. So custom repo rewrite rule, custom repo query vars, and custom repo template include. So I would just copy that into my clipboard, back in functions.php down at the very bottom, just paste it in, give it a save, and now I'll let you know something to avoid a ton of frustration. Anytime you're adding a new rewrite rule, you need to go flush your WordPress permalink structure. Otherwise, these changes will not take effect. So now that you've saved this file, what we need to do, just go into your WordPress admin dashboard. And in the left-hand menu, we're looking for settings. And under the settings menu, we're looking for permalinks. So click onto the permalink page. Now you don't need to even make any changes. Just visiting this page and then clicking Save Changes, that will flush your structure and sort of rebuild it. And now check this out. Do this with me. Back in VS Code, let's create a brand new file in the root of our folder and name it exactly repo-template.php. Now there's nothing special about this name other than the fact that that's what I chose in functions.php. So if you wanted to, on this line of code in functions, you could change it to pizza.php. You get the idea. But in this file, let's just say quick test, hooray, save that. And now back on my website, if I refresh the single URL for just one repo, awesome, we are in business. Now it's really simple. Let's go use our get external JSON function. And then just for educational value, let's go look at our database and see how transients and options are working. So to bring this page to life, we just go into repo template, get rid of that, jump into PHP right away. And now we can access this final segment of the URL by just saying get query var, and we named it custom_repo. Now, I'm not sure, WordPress might sanitize that for us, but I like to be extra careful. I'm not sure. You could Google that, but I would just wrap that in sanitize text field. And then I would save this into variables. So you could call it like clean value equals that, semicolon. And then next, let's build the URL that we want to fetch. So in other words, like the actual URL pattern for github.com, when you want to fetch data for just one individual repo, right? So we just spell out this URL pattern. So I'll just paste that in. So I would say like, I'm just making up a variable name like URL to fetch equals quotes, paste in your clipboard. Obviously, your username would be different here. But then I want to get rid of this ending repo name and make it dynamic. So I'd probably just get rid of that and then concatenate on. And then we named it clean value. But just to make sure it doesn't break the URL, I'd probably wrap it in URL encode and then give that $clean value, semicolon. Cool. And now on the next line, it's as simple as just saying $data equals and just use our old familiar function, get cached external JSON, and just give that $URL to fetch, semicolon. Cool. So then you could call like get header and then maybe exit PHP. And then this would be like your actual content. So content goes here. And then below that though, you'd go like back into PHP and call get footer. So instead of content goes here, maybe let's have like a heading level 2 and let's output the name of the repo. So, go into PHP, echo escape HTML, $data. Look in that array for quotes full_name. And if you're wondering how I knew that, if you just look at the raw JSON, right, there's a property called full name, and like that's what I'm going to show. Okay, and then maybe below that, let's show the stargazer count, like how many people have starred this repo. So you can just say like P for paragraph. I just included the star emoji and then like count : and then you'd want some number here, but to have it be dynamic, you just go into PHP, echo escape HTML, $data, square brackets for an array item, stargazers_count. So if I save that and refresh my single view for bootcamp pet data, cool, it has 4 stars. Or if I go back to my homepage and click on, Brad's boilerplate, this one should have a lot of, this one has 500 stars. Cool, but what if you visit a URL that doesn't make sense? Like what if I visit /repo/ just nonsense and I push enter, we get an error message. So we don't want that. Instead, if you visit a URL where no repo exists, we should just show a 404 message. So here's what I would do. Before we even include our header, let's just check to make sure. I would say like if parentheses, curly brackets. The condition is if is set And then in those parentheses, I'm looking for data, square brackets, name, but I'm looking for the opposite of this, so exclamation. So I'm saying if this is not set on the JSON data, that means we have some sort of problem. Like GitHub probably didn't give us back data because that repo probably doesn't exist. So then I would just say status header 404, and then also git template part 404, and then we can exit. So, prevent the further execution of any PHP. So if I give that a save, and now if I refresh this bogus URL, beautiful. At this point, things are looking really good. Like now, if I visit dog test, it should take, half a second, but if I refresh, it is instant. That's thanks to our caching. At this point, let's go take an educational moment to look at the database to really understand how this caching mechanism is working. So if you're like me and you're using local WP, you can always look at your database by just clicking on the database tab and then clicking open admin or evo. Cool, and then from this screen, we're looking for the table that's named WP options. So let's see, yeah, this one, WP_options. So click onto that and then click select data. Now you're going to have multiple pages worth, and if you just go to whatever the last pages, those are going to be the most recent ones. Let me zoom in a little bit now. And so now you're starting to see like our fetched JSON backup or transient our fetched JSON. And then this value, this is just the unique value based on the URL that you were trying to fetch. So in functions.php, the little bit of code that was using MD5 based on the URL, that's all that is. But then if you scroll over, so each one is storing the actual, like the JSON. I mean, this is the real value, the JSON response from github.com. So let me explain what's going on here. Back on my website, when I refresh this dog test, it retrieves immediately because it's not actually visiting github.com. It's just pulling from the transient in my database. Now, if we went into our database and deleted this transient, so whichever your most recent last one is, it's this one. I know that for me, this is dog test. If I deleted this, then when I refreshed, it would attempt to load a new transient. However, what if I delete that transient and then I disable my computer's Wi-Fi so that the request to go get the new copy fails? That's the whole point of having this double system. So inside the WP options table, if something doesn't begin with like transient, it's just a permanent option. Like this one is our fetched JSON backup. That's not a transient, that is just an option. So this will be around forever or until we write code to delete it. So our function that fetches external JSON, it's storing a copy in a temporary transient and a permanent value. This way, even if your request fails, you can always show the last successful attempt. The best way to understand how this works is let's make an edit to our option. So the one that ends in JSON backup. So I'll click edit. And I'll change the full name to, instead of dog test, I'll have it end in, like, instead of a T for test, I'll have it end in like a Z. And I'll let you know, don't just type in a bunch of changes. Try to just change one character worth. Like I changed the T to a Z because the way that WordPress stores data, see where it says S20? That 20 is saying that this should have exactly 20 characters. So if you want to add in some like custom value here, you would need to make sure that your number right before it matches. Otherwise, it'll be considered corrupt data or like invalid data. Okay, but I changed the T in the ending test to a Z, and then if I click save, now if I refresh, we will not see that. So I can refresh, we're still going to be served up the transient. However, if I go back and delete the transient, and be sure to turn off your Wi-Fi. Like I want the network request to fetch a new fresh copy. I want that to fail. Okay, so I just turned off my laptop's Wi-Fi, and now if I delete this transient, so delete that, confirm it. Now when I refresh, we should indeed, yep, we see the Z copy. So even if that request can't happen successfully, we're at least seeing our saved backup, the last good copy. I don't know about you, but I just feel really good about this setup. It feels robust. I can sleep at night knowing I always have the most current data, like within the last hour or 5 hours or 8 hours. And even if the next fresh request fails, WordPress has got my back. And then, to test that, you could just re-enable your Wi-Fi. Okay, so I just turned my Wi-Fi back on, and as soon as I click refresh, WordPress should go fetch the actual like fresh copy from github.com. Boom, awesome. So this way we get the best of both worlds. We have the always up-to-date fresh data, but even if everything fails, we've got a backup copy. That is going to bring this video to a close. If you enjoyed this video, the best way to help support my YouTube channel is visiting my website, learnwebcode.com. I have many feature-length premium courses that you can join, or another great way to help support my channel is at the very bottom of my website. If you click on hosting, for the last 19 years, I've used DreamHost to host all of my websites, and if you use my affiliate link to DreamHost, they will send compensation my way for sending new users their way. Cool, and just to recap, my premium bundle comes with 6 courses as of today. I'm working on adding more courses in the future, but as of today, the 6 courses are my front-end bootcamp, Laravel, MySQL, React, WordPress, and JavaScript. You also get access to an exclusive Discord chat community. Awesome. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for more web development tutorials.